We now have full clarity on what's next for the Gears of War franchise. It's not Gears 6, but we're going all the way back to where it all began, Gears of War Emergence Day. A whole change of direction from the Coalition and Xbox, and this opens up a whole new can of rockworms on Gears of War's future over the next 5, 10 and more years to come. As always, I'm your host Abz, and this is how I would plan Gears of War's future. We are officially in the year of Nuketown 2025, and I am hoping this is the year we have a Gears of War release. I've doubled down on my endless hopes for the Gears Remastered collection, and if I was pulling the strings as per the purpose of this video, I would greenlight the release of the Gears of War collection in 2025, and here's why. The hype for eday will continue, and the latest installment while fans await is Gears 5, which I believe, subjectively and objectively, is not the definitive Gears of War experience, for those wishing to scratch that Gears itch as they await Gears eday. Instead, the definitive ultimate Gears experience is of course the original trilogy. So I would have the collection released this year in 2025 on Xbox and PC and get the ball rolling. Revive the community, plaster the PC market with the masterfully crafted original trilogy, while also bringing in new fans along the way. But also the collection would serve as that timeless Gears experience, something that will never go away, and something that will keep the community afloat no matter the era. Have a small team within the Coalition or an outsourced team provide updates to the Gears collection as time progresses. For instance, cut DLCs, content, bug fixes, community requests, and so on. 2026 will be the 20-year anniversary of the Gears of War franchise, and I would mark this with Gears eday, being the signature game for the new Xbox console generation, signalling a new era for Gears of War by going back to where it all began. Now I prefer having the collection released before eday, because when new fans play eday and if they want to know what actually happens next, the next Marcus and Dom story is Gears 1 to 3. And once they play those games, although they are amazing classics, they need some attention by updating them with the latest tech. They need cleaning up, bugs and glitches need fixing. Having the remasters there beforehand would give many new fans an even better experience, especially considering a lot of those new fans would be younger and wouldn't have grown up on some of the older graphics and gaming that we did. Even for me, when I play Gears 1 or Ultimate Edition for instance, I find Dom's stupid AI so frustrating. There's bugs, and generally I think it could do with some quality of life updates. Same goes for Gears 2, I absolutely love it, but I despise getting stuck on covers, encountering bugs, and I think having its cutscenes remastered and having a toggle feature for new and old cutscenes would be freaking insane. So what I would do is I would release eday in 2026. I don't want eday to be a 2 or 3 year game cycle as we've kinda been accustomed to ever since Gears has existed. I think it needs to be supported for many years, and perhaps even having the multiplayer becoming standalone, so we don't have a reset and start from scratch all over again 3 years later. We need to look beyond that cycle. I believe that it needs to have an ongoing multiplayer experience, like what Fortnite does for instance. Keep evolving, keep pushing the limits of what Gears can do on a multiplayer landscape for millions of potential gamers. For eday, I think a small DLC story expansion once a year if possible would be very cool, telling different perspectives of eday itself, alongside other micro stories. There are many small stories to tell within eday itself, and in the whole franchise. The beauty of campaign DLCs is you can kinda just jump to any story, tie up any loose ends on characters, origin stories, different timelines, etc. In 2027, we could go for a campaign DLC of the Locust Horde's perspective on Emergence Day, playing campaign co-op as a whole squad of Locust as you obliterate gears and level up, find new cog weapons, modify them, steal and repurpose armor, etc. Or it could showcase General Khan on Emergence Day, where he destroys the nation of Goraznia, which would actually give some nice backstory to Paddock and Gears Judgment. Or it could be Krav Jamad's perspective on eday. There are many Locust points of views to tap into for Emergence Day, so much potential. In 2028 I'll throw another idea into the hat, so 2028's DLC could perhaps be a stranded story after the Hammer of Dawn strikes 1 year after eday. Maybe we play as Aaron Griffin, as he witnesses many of his people become scorched alive by the hammer strikes. He tries to rebuild, but also takes on gears who enter the city of Char. So this would be really interesting, and would be some human versus human conflict due to extremely high tensions, but also give us a stranded versus locust perspective as well, looking into how much of a fight they could give the locust. And Griffin was an awesome character, so I think that would be a pretty sweet DLC. In 2029 you can have another DLC. How about an actual Onyx Guard perspective? That would be freaking juicy. Let's take part in some classified Onyx Guard missions in the Locust War. That would be insane. Whether it's capturing Locust drones to experiment on them and trying to somehow get some information out of the Locust. Some classified missions would be capturing and saving key scientists, politicians, celebrities, and relocating them to Azura. Other classified missions could be something much darker, which would be capturing fertile women and placing them in the Cog's birthing farms, in order to try to save the human population from extinction after the hammer strikes. This DLC would shed some light on the many dark secrets of the Cog, many of which only came to light over a decade later in the war. I've got so many ideas, I could do this all day, but that would lead us to 2030. In the early 2030s, if I was running the show, I'd hope eday would continue being supported. The campaign DLCs could slowly come to an end, but I would want the multiplayer to continue being its standalone experience. And then from here there would be more opportunity for exploring other stories and focusing more on campaigns, and this I believe would be a successful formula, having a team focused on multiplayer, a small or outsourced team focused on the collection, and then the main team focusing on new story games. Because the timeless Gears collection would always be there would be an ongoing multiplayer experience, and so from here it would be about delivering stories from any part of the Gears universe, and not having to go for the safe option, such as Marcus and Dom for instance, instead of taking on more obscure stories in the whole universe. Let's say it's 2032, and the Gears of War franchise is hopefully in a really healthy place. There's an ever-present mainline multiplayer, evergreen Gears collection campaigns and multiplayer, many timeless campaign DLCs. So 2032 would nicely line us up to go for a Pendulum Wars game. And I've always had my concerns about this, but let me explain why I would be on board with the Pendulum Wars game by this point. I think we could make this work. The enemy roster is a huge aspect of what makes the Gears campaigns and gameplay so captivating, with all the different Locust variants. So this of course would be a big issue for a Pendulum Wars story game, with the human enemies. But I would combat this with insane levels and set pieces. I want set pieces of the UIR and Cog Navy going at it in the oceans of Sera, fighting in attack boats, assaults on warships, Sea King Ravens deploying, submarines, you name it. It can be Major Garen Paddock perhaps for the UIR's perspective, or you could go way earlier in the timeline, to early Pendulum War era, with Adam Phoenix's father or even grandfather, and really explore what Sera and its society was like in that era. I think the beginning of the Pendulum Wars could be really interesting to explore as well. I would really tap into the whole militaries during that era. I would be really interested in that, especially the vehicle warfare, and a look into what the Gears and Indies were actually thinking day to day about the war, their lives, and so on. I want a Gears of War real-time strategy game at some point, and I'm gonna squeeze that into 2033. Gears Tactics was a small success in its own right, but it was a turn-based strategy game, quite slow and methodical and quite a different concept. I think a Gears RTS at this point in Gears of War's lifetime cycle would go down a lot better with the fans, and gamers in general. Halo Wars was received well from what I recall anyway, so a Gears of War RTS would be insane, placing all of your Gears, Silverbacks, Centaurs, APCs, King Ravens and so on, as well as being able to place the Locust Horde, placing all your Locust troops, hollow creatures and emergence holds in real time against the Cog. There should be a story campaign tied in with it, but also a multiplayer where you can take on other players and get competitive. Who is the ultimate general on the battlefield? The story would be best suited in the Locust War, but it shouldn't be anything mainline. Potential stories of characters could include Clayton Carmine during an earlier point in the Locust War, which would be pretty sweet. It could be a Hoffman story. It could be Rojas from Gears 1. The list goes on. In 2035, I'm gonna go for that Locust vs Lambent game that needs to happen no matter what at some point. Gears of War Lambent War, or named something similar, whether it's the Lambent War before Emergent State itself, or the Lambent War which continued for 14 years underground, while the Locust War continued on the surface. To be honest, this could be multiple games worthy, or even a trilogy if done right, but in terms of a single game, I would go to the beginning, where the Lambent War first began, and I would love to play as General Srark, a monstrous Locust who was the leader of the Locust military. I want to see him fleshed out as a character, and seeing what he was capable of against a devastating Lambent, as well as also introducing other Locust characters and drones under him, and really exploring the Lambent as much as possible. There's so much potential to work with, and if you've seen some of my many lore videos, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Here we need to see more of the Locust civilization, the military at its full capability before taking heavy hits from the Lambent. I want to see the Locust Council, Keita Vrol, Ukon, the Queen herself, and from the Lambent side I want a huge destructive enemy roster, many Lambent of which we never saw in the original trilogy. A Gears of War Lambent War game is a must at some point, and would honestly, if done right, which is a big if, would be one of the best Gears games ever. Just too much potential, and 20 plus years worth of timeline to work with narratively. The years after 2035 could see more DLCs of telling any more potential stories and loose ends from the Gears of War universe, such as a Dizzy Wallin prequel, another stranded story but this time in the form of Franklin, maybe another story on Operation Hollow Storm but from another Gears perspective, such as Alicia Valera's younger brother. The list goes on. I believe that by 2040, if all these games and stories have released and been received well, then narratively I think that it may just be time, by this point, to reboot the Gears of War franchise. I know some people don't like the word reboot, but I want Gears of War to be around forever, and it's too big of an IP to just throw away and leave in the dust, and after more games in the coming years, there will be little room creatively to explore. Even for me, just thinking about it based off all the lore that I know, I want eday, yes. I want Pendulum Wars eventually, yes. I want Lambent War, yes, as well as other small stories, but after that, where do you even go for Gears of War? By 2040, give or take, they would have pretty much told everything narratively after over 30 years of the franchise existing, so it would be best by this point to reboot the franchise. But of course, when I say reboot, it doesn't mean everything from the past will get thrown away, that will always all be there, but start again, but try to go way beyond. Obviously, when Gears of War 1 was released in 2006, they didn't fully realise what they had on their hands until it was extremely well received, and then they went all out in Gears of War 2. We know this because Gears 1's story is more just about world building, nothing too special in terms of writing or character arcs. But a reboot of Gears 1 could absolutely pop off in an alternate timeline, and not boxing yourself into being 14 years into the war already. It could be an even better backstory of the world itself, and the Locust Horde could even be rewritten as not originally being humans, as what was told in Gears 2. And with the technology available now, or even in 2040, there'll be no technological handicaps like the developers had during 2006 or 2008. I think there will be so much potential, but once again a big if, which is if done right, which you can say for all the games and stories mentioned in this video. You may have noticed that there's no Gears 6 and the continuation of the new Gears story on how I would plan Gears of War's future. Well, that's because, simply put, I don't want it, and I don't think it should happen. And after eDay's success, if done right, then I don't think Xbox and TC will go back to that story. It's just not worth it in my opinion. I know that they did say that they're not abandoning that story and what's next, but I think that's just PR. I think they'll slowly sweep it under the rug as time goes on. It wasn't a success however way you look at it, because if it was, then eday wouldn't have even been a thing. The writing is on the wall. To be honest, I don't even know where they would go with Gear 6's story. It would just be an all-out war with the Swarm, but the way they wrote the Locust surviving the emotion countermeasure weapon now means that the Locust can always survive pretty much anything, which is pretty stupid, along with the fact that they just practically brought back Reyna from the dead, so it's a whole freaking mess. They should have just turned Kate into the Queen, but maybe I'll make a video one day talking about how I would have wrote Gears 5. But I would just close up shop on that new story honestly, and just turn it into a nightmare that Marcus had one day after Operation Hollow Storm. The Coalition and Xbox can still do so much with Gears of War, and I hope there's a long, bright future ahead for this very special franchise. This is just my opinion, of course, on how I would plan Gears of War's future. You may really like some of my ideas, but you may also dislike some, so please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Please do drop a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and a big special thank you to those that help support me and the channel further as well through memberships and Patreon. I'm your host Abz, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.